Greetings all. Thank you for joining me on the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast. I've always been fascinated by why and how people do what they do. This podcast is a way for me to put a spotlight on Africans in art, culture, media design, and all the spaces in between, and chat to them about their journeys, perspectives, and the like. It's an extension of a book I wrote a few years ago called Listen to Your Footsteps, in which I reflect on my own journey, including fatherhood, identity, and life in general. I try to bring that to every conversation I have. Enjoy. So my guest for today's show is a good friend, an entrepreneur, and a technology person. I think that's how I can classify him. Mushambi Mutuma.
Yeah.
How are you, bro?
I'm doing well, man. It's good to see you.
You too. So what did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, when I was growing up, when I was quite young, I always saw my dad selling, and he was an incredible salesperson. Still is to this day. Far outshines me in that arena. A great orator as well, and I saw how well he did at selling, and I wanted to be like that when I was quite young. Yeah,
Which is quite interesting because I mean, in some of the circles we inhabit and interact with, sales is always something that's pushed as the thing that everybody needs to know how to do. And for some of us, it's a really difficult space to be in.
yeah.
What was it about seeing your father selling that kind of appealed to you?
Yeah, it was just so easy for him. Like it was second nature. It was conversational. It was never pushy. It was never like, he always felt like he was helping people. And thankfully, like growing up, I got to spend a lot of time with him and watch him at work. I used to hang out at his offices growing up. We used to go on trips together. So I got to see him in that element quite often. And I just was, and I still am, I just admire how seamless it is for him and the benefits that he gave people, more than just like trying to push and give him a great deal. It was always like he was helping people and then he happened to be making some money doing it. And I just always thought that was so cool.
How's your perception of him evolved? I mean, so I was talking to somebody recently about my father, and somebody was saying he seemed like a really great man. And I responded with, he was, but obviously it took me time to figure that out because, for example, as a teenager, he's the person not letting me do the things that I want to do.
Yeah.
So from the outside, everybody go, oh, this is kind of a great person. But when you're young and you're being raised by somebody, you don't recognize that. And I always say I was fortunate enough to have him alive till I became an adult.
Yeah.
Until I had the maturity to really understand him, flaws and all, as a human being, as a man.
Yeah. No, that's very fair. I think I was lucky is that growing up, we were very close. Like I said, we traveled a lot. So there was a time he worked at Apple Computer, and I knew 2 weeks out of the year, no matter what it was, I'd be able to go on holiday with him. He would go to Macworld and the WWDC conference for a couple of years there in my childhood. And I knew those are the 2 trips me and dad are going on. And so that was amazing to be able to travel with him and spend that time together. So we were super close. And then I think that shifted obviously when I went away to school and then started traveling and being in other parts of the world. And now kind of as an adult, our relationship shifted quite a lot. Family dynamic has shifted quite a bit. And I think that, adulthood has brought him back down to earth where he used to kind of be this god amongst men. And if you hear his voice, talk about a voice for podcasts or for radio. I mean, he did that in his life. He's just got this boom of a voice and a great orator. So I really looked up to him, but I think adulthood and seeing through life and difficulty and the things that he had to go through and learning more about that as a man kind of brought him down to earth, which I think was good because it made him more relatable. Because I used to, how can I compete with this guy? You know, how can I be like him? And thankfully, I see a lot more similarities and see where we're alike in flaws and in the goodness as well. And so now it's a different dynamic. We don't spend as much time together, but I think there's a nice mutual respect as 2 men beyond just, father and son. So
would you say it brought him down to earth, or as you have evolved, you've started to understand him a bit better?
Both. I'd say definitely both, but I do understand. And I mean, offline we were chatting about raising kids and raising teenagers, and I know, shame, like that guy was probably like scratching his head in his room, like, what do I do with this kid? So I feel for him much more, and now my son is showing me flames. So I certainly understand him, his childhood, what's made him the man that he is, good and bad. I get that a lot more now than I did growing up, obviously.
You've also grown up in different environments. So, I mean, coming from Zim, living in the US, now living in South Africa.
Yeah.
How has that kind of shaped how you look at the world?
Maybe that's going to be a book one day. It feels, and I actually like wrote down like an outline for it, like, you know, and I think the title I was messing with is like Constant Outsider or Forever Outsider. Because growing up in Zim for a short period of time, I left when I was about 5 or 6, went to the US, was in Texas of all places, went back to Zim often, and just felt like disconnected from Zim. My Shona wasn't as good. I was living in the US now. And then in the US, I was either the African or the black kid in the minority. And that kind of, depending on which environment I was, whether in Texas and then I went to school in California, it was the same. I was either the only African or the only black kid. And then coming back to South Africa, has been like being the American, right? In some circles, and then being the Zimbabwean in some circles. So it's always just been, on the outside and maybe not as deep rooted and entrenched as everybody else, which I won't lie has been difficult. But I think that the great part and what I appreciate is it's even, you know, a key part of, I think, our friendship, right? Is that I've attached now and built a new family with people who have similar, I guess, diversities in terms of their background and stories that aren't as atypical, and being able to relate to people in that sense, I think, and not feel alone as being that only outsider, the only one that wasn't, you know, deep rooted or from here or speak as well or whatever it might be. So now I appreciate it, but coming up, it was hard.
I mean, interestingly, my book, one of the titles for my book, one of the books I wanted to write was the working title was From the Edges.
Yeah.
And having a conversation with a friend who was encouraging me to write about exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And she was saying that you'd be surprised how many people feel like that.
Yeah.
Even people who on the surface looks like they belong in places.
Yes.
So, I mean, Pharrell had that, I am other.
Yep.
And the number of us that feel like other builds a community in itself in a weird way.
Yeah, it certainly does. And I think I've learned to kind of appreciate that, and I guess appreciate the diversity of my background and try to leverage off of that versus, I guess coming up, it was just, it was a hard thing. So now I take comfort in the twang. At least it's legitimate.
Well, we can have a conversation about how long is it going to stick around.
Hey, man.
You've been out of the US for how long now?
It depends, hey? It was like, my wife teases me about it. It's like, if I'm with my family or her family in Pretoria or in the hood, like, it switches up apparently. When I'm speaking to other people, it switches. If I get on the phone and speak to my friends in the US, it's different. So it moves and shapes, right? When I'm speaking on stage, depending on who's paying, something else comes out too.
I mean, it's interesting because Americans especially talk about kind of code switching.
Yes, that's it.
But I think we have it, we have it within South Africa itself. And depending on who you speak to, I was always fascinated by my father, how his accent would change depending on who you were speaking to.
Yeah.
And in a way, it made them feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Whereas in our current space, it's something that's often held up as something that, it's held up as something that makes you different in a negative way.
Yes,
as opposed to actually it's being able to navigate spaces and make others feel comfortable and show relatability.
No, that's true. And I joke about it when I speak, is because when I first get on stage, you could see people like looking around like, geez, what is this guy trying to do? And then I got to give the context, right? And call him out. So I think, we do view it a bit negative. And I think it's also that socialization of coming from like previously disadvantaged schools or Model C schools or racially diverse schools. And then, it's you're trying to be fancy if you've got this all boys school twang, right? Versus that relatability and the code switching part of it. Like I always tell my wife, it's unintentional, right? It just flows, and your brain just switches just depending on who you're speaking to or in the environments. And you don't even notice it.
Yeah,
and you're like, oh,
absolutely.
Wow. Yeah.
Whenever I go to Ghana, my accent in my head
Yes.
seems so strong. And I have friends going, you sound so South African.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, but South Africans say I don't sound totally South African.
Yeah.
And it's one of those little twinges.
Yeah.
That you shouldn't be bothered by.
Yeah.
But it still kind of bothers you.
That's that outsider, right? That's the edges.
What did you study?
Jeez, man. So I had 2 degrees, political science and art. So I thought I was going to go into law. And then half of me also just wanted to paint.
That I didn't know.
Yeah. Literally. 2 different sides of the brain.
And then you end up in tech.
And then I end up in tech, hey? Yeah. I really wanted to go into law school when I was growing up. That was kind of the other thing. Like I thought Johnny Cochran was amazing. I think that OJ trial and a couple others, I just watched him. I remember writing him a letter when I was in high school, like, please, can I come and work for you? A literal letter, right? Handwritten and everything. He never responded to me. But I thought that somehow, I'll go into law. So political science was kind of the entry point in the US system of, you typically understand that. And then either you go into politics or law. And then art, I just love to draw. I love to paint. And I was like, oh, let me just take a class while I'm doing the other. Then I took 2 and then I took 3. And one of my professors, he's just like, just add it as another major and we'll figure it out. And I did, and I did all right. So yeah, I went further in law and I wanted to go into law school thereafter, but I understood, or what I learned about law is just like not enjoyable, particularly in the US legal system. Like it's not just about case law and history and justice. They were teaching us so many workarounds, right? And you're just like, this thing just doesn't feel just. So that really bothered me. Art, I studied in Florence actually for 4 months one summer. And I was doing art restoration, so painting restoration and stonework, like sculpture restoration. My professor at the time worked on the David statue. Like that's what he did every year. And my painting restoration teacher did Caravaggio's. And so I was making rabbit skin glue and learning like all these old ancient non-PC animal-friendly techniques because that's what they use. And I really enjoyed it. And I thought, oh yeah, this is something here. But the Italian art restoration world is a very small world run by a few families. And if you haven't been part of it for hundreds of years, they weren't going to let this young Black African get in. So that kind of fell away eventually. But yeah, that's what I studied.
Yeah, you've added a whole dimension that I never knew about.
I never knew we didn't talk about that.
Yeah. What was then the shift? So, I mean, when we met, you were kind of taking your first steps for me in terms of within the tech space.
Yeah.
Between art restoration and it not happening anymore.
Yeah.
To that. Like what happened in between there?
Jeez, man. So actually another completely different shift happened. So in school, it was politics, it was art, and a lot of activism. And social justice is what happens for most of us, right? We get a little bit woke and we start preaching Biko to everybody around us. And out of that activism, I got actually involved in the HIV/AIDS space. So that's actually where we met, I think, with the U.S. Embassy way back. Okay. But anyways, so I got involved in the HIV/AIDS space. I was working for a university in the U.S., and they sent me back to Africa. And I really I walked into my boss's office and I demanded he send me here. And I gave him this whole case. And then I went back to my desk and I was like, I don't know if I still have a job because I just demanded this guy ship me to the other side of the world. But they did. He listened, and I still thank that man to this day. So I was working for UCLA, and I was managing all of their HIV and AIDS research projects across the continent, like 13 countries across Africa and Asia. Literally going to each country, helping them set up clinics, running these studies, making sure we're compliant, and just traveling like literally like 75-80% of my time. And I love that, man. And I really got to be parts of a lot of grassroots stuff and policy. And I thought, okay, let me go get a master's in public health. And there was something that just wasn't clicking, and I just didn't love it. And what was in the back of my mind was my dad, that history of Apple, loving tech, and thinking, okay, maybe I should do something there. So I completely left that world behind. My old boss, not the big one that moved me here, but another lady, she was just like, I thought you were so smart. Like, she was just like, why are you leaving? And I literally like jumped right into tech and trying to start this agency. And so it wasn't from history. It wasn't schooling. It was just something that was nagging me inside that said, take this leap. And shame, man, I did. And I literally left like an entire network. My entire network in South Africa at the time was in public health. I didn't really know many people aside from a few friends outside of that. So it was a big jump. But yeah, man, the heart was calling, and thankfully it worked out okay.
I'm discovering new things about you today.
We haven't seen each other in a while. Clearly.
So, I mean, taking those steps into tech.
Yeah.
And your last company, I don't know if it still exists because of COVID.
Yeah.
But what was it like trying to build a new network within Spaces?
Yeah.
And actually getting to the point where you wrote a book around it.
Yeah. Geez, it was hard, man. I think that when we first got into that space, so I had a few friends that were designers, developers, UI designers. That was like 2010, 2009. And I thought, I've got this crew of guys who are unhappy in different agencies and studios across the country. Let me put them together. Let me try to sell as good as my dad did. I think I can wax lyrical. And we literally got around the table of my apartment and my co-founder's apartment, and that's what we did. And I remember at the time, iPads were like brand new. And so we're going around to different publishers, right? Another place we connected, and just being like, no, you guys need a mobile application, right? And all these companies, all these newspapers, all these magazines were just like, oh, it's a business class lounge thing. No one's going to download an app. Like, what are you talking about? And that was the entry point, right? Trying to sell e-commerce to people. And them not even understanding kind of websites and the value that they had then, and trying to and that wasn't really that long ago. It sounds like such a 90s problem, but this was, like the 2000s, I guess. And so just trying to evolve people and thinking, it was really hard the first couple of years. And we were working out of the apartment probably for the first 3-4 years. And then it started to have a conversion, and people started getting it. And some of those people called us back and said, hey, remember what you were asking us about a couple of years ago? Come and do it. And I think, it was just a timing thing, and it finally kind of took hold. And we built a decent business, kind of building out digital products, a lot of e-commerce work, custom platforms, mobile applications, a lot of stuff in the financial services space. And I think that helped build that network, is that I was always the guy trying to talk about tech and where things were going, trying to say it was important for Africa. And the network there, I guess, grew, like attending every single networking event that existed, being front and present. There was an alcohol brand that we partnered with, and I became an ambassador of, Grolsch, and that swim talk circle. Yeah. I don't even know if they're in the country anymore or what, but I was thinking about them the other day. And that actually really helped my network, because they basically facilitated me to have networking events every other week. They paid for it, gave us food, gave us lots of grolsch, and it was at really nice restaurants. And so that was actually a game changer for my network, because I just got like free privilege, and I used it. Not a lot of ambassadors did, but I milked that thing.
I just had 2. And I was just like, yeah, okay, fine.
No, man, I milked it. Hey, I had like 2 or 3 a month. And I literally milked it, and I would invite and use guys to invite other guys, and that helped. Just having conversations just like this. And a lot of my close circle is from that network and from those dinners. So shout out to them. I definitely do that again.
Also, the irony of you pitching iPad apps to publishers.
Yeah.
And I know that you pitched to publisher I worked for, and your then girlfriend, now wife, also worked for. And while you were trying to push for the iPad app, I was on the inside going, it doesn't make sense to do one.
Yeah. I remember.
And then kind of, because technology has been changing so fast.
Yeah.
Like we went from, this is a new thing, to, oh, let's get an iPad app, to actually the website is what's most important.
Yes, exactly.
And in a way, kind of making that shift.
Yeah.
I mean, the irony is the reason why I was against the iPad app was more because I saw the amount of work that would go into it.
Yeah.
And what a lot of publishers at the time did not recognize was that you'd literally you'd have to add to how you create,
That's it.
how you write stories. And I remember I used to use Esquire as the example because they were one of the first.
Yes.
But their covers were a video.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, well, okay, if you're going to do an iPad app, then
you have to recreate all these new kinds of
Then
content.
also we need more people.
Yeah.
And obviously, because of money, that's what kind of put my then boss off the idea of spending more on things like iPad apps.
Yeah. No, but I think it was an evolution, right? And I think what none of us understood at the time also was the audience that you had to build on all those respective apps, right? Because social media was still evolving. Twitter was early days. I remember, that was days where you and I would be on there and you'd say good morning to people and they would respond and say good morning, right?
The days when you could see, as long as you followed somebody, you could see all their tweets.
Yeah.
And there was no like those ads, but even if I messaged you directly, everybody following me could see.
That's it.
Could see our conversation.
Yeah. And it was so actually communal. I remember even like Questlove, there was like this small little hip hop community as well on Twitter, and he was one of the first. And you could just greet him and he would respond. He would be asking questions. And it was so much smaller than it is.
My big deal was Chuck D responding to me.
Yeah.
That's actually how I got into tech writing.
Wow.
What I did was I found the main tech journals in South Africa.
Yeah.
And I started following all of them and interacting with them.
Gotcha.
And have built relationships with them over the years. And I gradually just did that to the point where all the tech brands were now, inviting me to launches, and then I'd write, that's when I was still blogging.
Yes.
Blog about that stuff. An interesting conversation you and I had once was when you're looking to expand in the speaking space.
Yeah.
And you're looking broadly in terms of being able to share the lessons that you've learned in terms of your journey, et cetera, et cetera. But I've now found what I consider a really good space as an African who's interacting with technology and innovation in a way that makes sense for us, because most of the stuff was directed to us.
Yeah.
And you and I had this conversation. I was like, if you do motivational speaking, you sound like everybody else.
Yeah.
You then took it a step further and actually wrote a book.
Yeah.
What was the process of writing that book? I mean, as a starting point I have written a lot, but I still struggled with, let's call it imposter syndrome when I was writing the book.
Yeah.
You are coming from diverse spaces and now sitting to communicate your thoughts in a way that hadn't been central to kind of what you do.
That's true. Yeah. It's a good point. And I remember that conversation to this day. And I was actually thinking about it last week. And you actually said, because I remember I was balancing between like a lot of entrepreneurial, motivational, inspirational, I don't know if it was like the Black Gary V or what content. And you're coming through like a preacher. Coming through like a preacher. What about this space? Nobody else is there. Do that. And it literally was a light bulb moment to say, no one was speaking in the tech space, certainly in the African tech space. So the book, actually, I was on a flight coming back from the US and I was really frustrated because I had just spent, I think, a week or two in Silicon Valley. Learned a lot, was amazing examples. And I was like, I don't want to use any of these lessons learned the next time I get on stage. Because I'm tired of telling everybody else's stories. So the book, I was like sitting on the plane, it's 14 hours, and I'm like trying to think of all the African tech I know about. And I was taking notes and trying to think of people, wishing I had the internet connection. And I was like, this is what I have to focus on. So the book initially was just like research for me. I was like, I never want to mention Silicon Valley again when I get on stage. I never want to talk about Tel Aviv or Singapore. Like, I was like, I'm tired, no more. So that was the first step, was like, just figure out where this African excellence is. Is there? Does it exist? Let's talk about that. And then that flowed and flowed and flowed. And I started thinking about our relationship with technology and thinking that, you know what, like this thing, you mentioned imposter syndrome. A lot of us have imposter syndrome when it comes to tech. It's like, that's too confusing. I never learned to code. I'm not a developer. It's only for those guys in other parts of the world. I can't do it. And so I thought, if we can localize it and show people examples of African tech and tech by people that look and sound like you, we can also try to simplify what tech is. And tech's just a tool. Like, it doesn't have to be this AI thing, this machine learning. It's just a tool. The pen that you use is tech. And so that was the early days of that, of just trying to make it as relatable and easy for people as possible to say, you know what, like, you can use this in your job. You can use this in your business. You can, as a kid, you can enter this space without, like me. I mean, I told you, like, my background, none of it was tech. All the only thing in tech in my background was my dad bringing home different Apple computers for me to play with. But he actually, and I asked him the other day, like, why didn't you encourage me to code? And he's just like, I just wanted you to have fun, you know? So I had access to all these computers, but I wasn't doing anything but some gaming and just tinkering and just enjoying it, but not in the sense of like Silicon Valley of like, I was 12 years old building applications and writing, you know, I didn't do any of that. And so for me, it was just like, my own story is a non-tech to tech story. How do we create that for other people? And that was the position behind the book. That's the position behind like a lot of my speaking, is just to simplify it and, you know, quote unquote, dumb it down for people and make it accessible. Then people are like, oh, wow, that's what I can do. That's what it does for me. And then that, I think, is when we're able to grow.
This is the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast, a journey into the life and perspectives of Africans living on their own terms. I also have an email newsletter, a book, and even music playlist available on my site, kojobafo.com. Let's get back to the conversation. Part of the narrative around, oh, we must teach our children how to code, we must do this, we must do that, is also driven by kind of a very Western and American specifically lens. And so what I enjoyed about the book was that it's demonstrating that it's a vehicle and we can plug into it and interact with it. I mean, we're all forced to interact with it, whether we realize it or not. But it's being able to use it as a tool as opposed to, oh, this is the thing. Because for a very long time, and this has been my gripe with even social media and the different platforms when talking about storytelling, is, you know, at some stage, like Facebook was what was important, Twitter was what is important, the website's what is important, and you know, I come from the perspective of those are merely platforms. What's important is the story, and being able to show people that it doesn't matter your level of interest or your level of skill. It's a tool for you. And not negating the fact that there's some of us who will go, actually, I'm interested in building, I'm interested in coding, I'm interested in how that works. And saying, yes, there's a space for you. I mean, it's because I know it's like the difference between yourself and your co-founder. Who's, you know, he's a, I'm building the machine type of person.
That's it.
And it's saying that there's a space for all of us within that as Africans. And just using it as a tool to better your environment is not a bad thing. Just because you can't code.
That's it. And I think that's what I appreciate about even the evolution of tech right now, is that with all this automation and ChatGPT, of course, and Gen AI, it's making it even more and more and more accessible. Is that Now, I mean, some jobs are, of course, under threat, but now you can learn a couple prompts and build a website and build an app. And so the beautiful part of that for me is that if you've got a problem that you want to solve, you don't have to go to school and learn it. You don't have to have access to the most powerful computer or someone to teach you in it. Like you can bring that thing to life a lot easier. And for me, more than I guess the threat to jobs and so forth, for me, I feel like it levels the playing field for a lot of Africans and people in developing countries, because now we've got access to things that we wouldn't have had 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, that literally just didn't exist. That excites me. And that's when I guess technology and its benefits start to get democratized to a certain extent. And I think there's tremendous potential when that happens.
So you're a parent.
Yeah.
How do you then think about let's call it the educational trajectory of your children? So, I mean, I grew up in a time I grew up in a household where I was always going to university.
Yeah.
It was not a discussion point.
Yeah.
It's like, you're going to university, that's the sequence. Yes. You go to primary school, you go to creche or kindergarten, you go to primary school, you go to high school, and you go to university.
Yeah.
I had to explain a technicon to my father from an academic perspective for him to allow my brother to go to one.
Right.
Because on the surface, it felt like a less than.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how I actually related to is because in Germany, a craftsman to be a master craftsman is like having a PhD.
Yeah.
And it has that level of respect.
Right.
So because he lived in Germany for many years, that's what I equated it to.
Gotcha.
So taking what we're talking about into consideration, how do you view what you hope for or the potential trajectory of your children within this world today?
No, for sure. I think the lucky part for me is that my kids are still quite young, like 7 and 5, right? The university construct has not evolved in hundreds and hundreds of years, right? Which is a big disservice because it's broken in a lot of ways, particularly in the U.S. and the Western world, and the loan system and the financial system that backs it. That's another conversation. I think that, by the time my kids are ready to go to university, it's still going to be even more evolved than it is now, in the sense that I don't view it as a requirement. I was never really focused on great grades, to my parents' dismay. My wife is similar. She comes from an arts background, which her mother didn't understand, being a lawyer, and all her sisters like having multiple degrees now. She was the black sheep in that regard. And so for both of us, it's like, I just want them to be happy. My kids are brilliant. They're both incredibly smart, smarter than both of us. So I'm just like, I want them to be happy and to have fun. I don't care if they want to go to school or don't want to go to school. There's so many opportunities for them to learn and to evolve that doesn't need that 3 years or 4 years, and certainly not that big fee that comes along with it, right? And so now, we're just trying to open them up to that. Is that this doesn't have to be the tick box that you have. I appreciate going to university. I appreciate more than anything the friendships I got there, and they're literally lifelong. And I appreciate kind of the EQ I learned and the responsibility. But there's so many other places I could have learned that, and ways I could have learned that and built those relationships without, $100,000 of debt. Looking back, I'm just like, all I got is this group of friends for this much, So, and yes, also considering like what I ended up doing with life, like it's completely far removed to what I studied, as you learn in this conversation. So for me, for my kids, I want them to kind of open up and be able to learn and do whatever they want without that limitation. And I think most corporates also, right, and jobs, even entrepreneur or in corporate, I never have hired based on where somebody went to school or what they learned. I've hired based like on a unicorn mentality of like 90% of what we do in most environments you can learn. It's not taught. And if you're a person that shows that you can learn, that you can do multiple different things, that I can stick you in a bank, or I can stick you in a consultancy or a startup, or put you on radio, that you can figure it out, that's who I'm always hiring for. That kind of agility. Not because, oh, you went here and then you went here and then you did this. I could care less. Like, I don't want to read your CV. Like, just tell me about you and what you've solved and how you've built and what you want to do going forward. That kind of hybrid has always been the best kind of employee for me, and what we've always looked for, more than, you know, that perfect degree and CV.
But I mean, hopefully that's the evolution of our society, where one of the effects of things like colonialism and a particular perspective is, you know, education became important to Africans.
Yeah.
And it became, you know, you must do this, you must do that, you must have a particular profession, a particular title. You know, I mean, I'm always fascinated by West Africans, even though my roots are there.
Yeah.
The use of title and the importance of title.
Yeah.
And title is actually profession.
Yeah.
So if you're a lawyer so-and-so. You know, if you're an accountant, you're accountant so-and-so.
Yeah.
We all know it for doctor, but it applies kind of
everything else.
across the board.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, I see that evolution, the positive part of the evolution being where we're now getting to the stage where, like, our children, call it, you know, kind of or third generation.
Yes.
You know, if we count ourselves as second generation, like third generation are getting to the point where they can make decisions on life on the basis of life.
Yes.
And living a good life, as opposed to you need to do this to be able to reach that, 100%. To be able to live a decent life.
Yeah. No, that's 100% it, because I think they were constrained, right? Our parents, and even theirs, even more so. And I don't think that our particular generation has reaped the full benefit of that, right? And I think, like you said, our kids will, because they've got that freedom, they've got that access. They're in a kind of a different societal position than when we were coming up, and I'm excited for them because of that. You know, it's like you literally can do whatever. And there's so many professions that I couldn't have even dreamed of, even it being in the tech space, as being as lucrative or just appealing as they are. And I think that I just get excited for what their potential future could look like. So we're just trying to keep it broad and open and raising them. Music, not so much really even in the tech, like they haven't started that space. I'm always kind of like wondering, should they start coding? Should they not? But I don't want that to just be like where they get stuck. So I've tried to open them up to kind of a lot of things, a lot of physical activities, sports, but music is also like just a key one for us as well. And then I think there'll be plenty of time for them to get on the tech bandwagon.
Also, I mean, I find, like, my kids' school, they started coding and robotics at like 8-9 years old. Yeah. And it's part of the curriculum.
Yeah, my daughter starts next year.
So it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
It's just another dimension
that you have
to study. I still remember with my son, because I remember in high school kind of lighting the light bulb using a potato or something.
Yes.
And at the same age, he already had a sense of satellites. Yeah. Because there was no power. I picked him up from school, and his question was, is there electricity? And I said, no. And he goes, so it means the Wi-Fi is not working. You know, and they have that as their standard. Yeah. Which means hopefully automatically their thinking is gonna. Their thinking will surpass us, because
100%.
Like, I remember my first cell phone, and I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
I remember Google. I used to use Alta Vista before that. So it is interesting watching them, and I mean, when you talk about music and that sort of stuff, like my son makes beats. And because I've been around the music industry, automatically I was now going, but you're just selling these things to friends for like $300, but royalties and registering the songs and everything else. And then I realized that he does it because he enjoys doing it. And it's not for me to go, this is the route you want to go. If he reaches a point where it's like, I really want to explore this, then I can say, okay, well, here's the foundation to it.
Yeah.
Also, he does the music for this show.
Right.
Well, I mean, I took one of his tracks. So
Did you pay him licensing?
no, I paid him 0 licensing. So I shouldn't be
Come holler at your uncle quick.
I shouldn't be encouraging him to look at the business side, because one day
you're gonna have to pay for it.
I'll get a phone call going, listen, so where's my money?
Yeah, man. We'll backdate this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about kids. You talk about traveling with your father, and what was interesting for me was you've started that with your son, or at least you guys have done kind of the one trip.
Yes, yeah.
What was that like?
The trip with my son.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. So I was coming out of a season where I was away. I was traveling a lot. There was like 2-3 months where I was super busy, either, late nights at work or I was on the road. And he was getting super needy. Shame, man, like to the point I'm like going to the gas station, to the petrol station, and he's like crying, like, don't leave. And just like little errands like that. So I was just like, you know what? Like, he actually needs some more time with me. And so we went away for a weekend to the bush, just me and him. And it was amazing, man. Like it was literally a core memory for both of us, not just for him, of just talking, him asking me, little ridiculous questions, asking me how stuff worked, and just having meals together, just doing activities, just me and him, because I hadn't done that. I've done a couple things where it's just me and the kids, me and my daughter, but not just like dedicated time, actually, in a while, more than like just going to the car wash or something. So it was beautiful, man. And it's certainly something that I want to make kind of routine. Because thinking about it, like I said about my dad, is that I'll never forget any of those trips. And it was, even though I think it was only over the space of like 3 or 4 years, 2 trips a year, 1 year, maybe 1 trip, it felt like such a big part of my childhood. Like looking back now, you'd swear that was half my childhood was being on the road with my dad, but it was just a couple days here and there, right? So I want to recreate that, because that time, that energy was just invaluable, man. And the connection. And I mean, he's 5, but I felt our relationship grow in those 2 days together. So I'm planning one with my daughter soon as well, just for me and her, because she also keeps asking, like, Daddy, what about me? Where's our daddy-daughter trip? So we're gonna do something. We're gonna do something together quite soon as well. So yeah, man, I think you get so caught up in life and trying to provide and take care of them. And what I've trying to be more intentional about is also spending the time with the moments, because I don't remember, my dad paying school fees. I don't remember, the things that he bought me. I remember those trips, and I want them to think of our relationship the same way. Like, yeah, maybe dad was busy sometimes, but I remember all the times that he took out for me, and our relationship more than he was a provider. So it's a balance, because you want them to have a better life than we did. You don't want them to have certain struggles that we had to have, but it's like, at what cost? And that's the current daily struggle, is trying to balance that out. Yeah.
How has it been trying to find that balance?
Yeah.
Not just with your kids, but also with your wife,
and
your family as a unit, shifting from running your own business to a purely corporate space?
Yeah, man. I won't lie.
I won't talk about the behind the scenes of shifting to the corporate space, because I know a lot.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
Just in terms of that initial shift and finding that balance, and now that you've been there for, it's a couple of years now.
Yeah, almost 2, man. Yeah.
Been there, and also how you're thinking about life is evolving.
Yeah, it's been a big shift, and it's been a challenge. I think that, being in entrepreneurship 12 years and doing that, it had its own struggles, right? Like, no matter how much money's in the bank, the 25th is a pain point, right? Because those SMSs are coming out versus in, no matter how well the business is or when it's struggling.
And it's not just your life.
Yeah, it's everyone else's life.
Everyone else's,
right?
as well.
And their parents and their kids. And so it was it's a big burden, right? Of taking on other people's livelihoods, and when you hire them, promising that, hey, man, I'm going to make sure that you can take care of your mom, and your kids' school fees will get paid more than my own, right? Yeah. It was filled with lots of stress. Transitioning into the corporate space, different kinds of pressure, right? A lot of, in my current environment, a lot of sales pressure, lots of growth pressure. But if our clients don't pay, like, not my bag, right? Like, I'm still getting paid. They'll cover, right? But it comes at a cost for sure. My days are hectic. My days are busy. And I'm not so in control of my time anymore. I miss being able to be like, hey, Kojo, let's go for a quick smoke, right? And it's like anytime. Like, now this has got to be a pre-scheduled activity and in the calendar, right? And that's been a struggle because it happens at home too, right? Is that I've lost that kind of flexibility of my time is no longer my own. And so the current struggle is, how do I refine that? Can I find it in this environment? Is it back in entrepreneurship? Is it something new? And that's the current balance that I'm trying to figure out. At the same time, knowing that I've got lots of responsibilities and I'm trying to take care of my family and make sure that they're good and they continue to grow and life continues to improve, but to make sure that I'm healthy mentally, physically, even financially enough to still be around for that. And that's the current work that I'm doing right now. I don't know if there's a specific balance, but I will say in this present moment, I'm hyper aware of all sides of it and understanding the costs and the flexibility or lack thereof in each of the scenarios. But yeah, man, I'm trying to figure it out, and I think I'm on that path, and hopefully we'll have it sorted soon. But this is adulting. It's manhood. It's fatherhood. It's husbandhood. It's no joke, right? And life continues to throw you curveballs throughout it all, right? No matter how things are going. So, yeah, man, I think it's the cause of all these gray hairs.
I blame my children. I tell them this one belongs to you. This section belongs to you.
Yeah, this is my wife over here.
So what's always struck me about you is that you are reflective of it, and I think that's an important part of adulting and navigating, especially as men, especially as African men, is you're living and you're making decisions, but also you're constantly coming back to reflect on those decisions, because there's no perfect situation, right? There's no ideal. And being in a job and being in a corporate, it has its benefits as well. I don't think there's one that's better than the other in a binary sense. It's literally about what works for your life, where you are in a moment, but constantly reflecting on it to ensure that if you need to make a decision down the line, it's not happening by accident.
That's it. And I guess that's also the benefit of having a diverse background, right? Is that I think that I'm decent at a couple different things, and I've got the benefit of not having to be locked into one thing, right? One profession. I could go back and start another business and do all right. I could stay in the corporate environment and grow and continue. I could jump to another and do the same. I could focus on my speaking full time, potentially. So I think that I've also got the benefit and the blessing that I'm not locked in. I've got a couple friends that studied one thing and that's what they know. And they don't feel the flexibility to be able to like, oh, I can't jump and go do anything else. This is me only. And so I think that's what makes me reflective, as you said, is because I guess I'm not locked in. I don't have to stay. I'm not forced to stay in any kind of situation. And so what I'm trying to do is be then accountable to say, okay, cool, then do it the right way or figure out your own right way. I guess there is the gift and the curse is that there's no rule book, right? The curse is there's no rule book and there's no instructions when you need one. But the gift is that there's no instructions, man. You can just do it. And I'm trying to live in that presently.
As he looks off into the distance.
I'm trying. It's no joke though, yeah.
To close up, I'm fascinated by the art thing.
Yes.
How do you kind of, let's say, scratch that itch or manifest that aspect of yourself in your life? And I mean, not just like, okay, creating stuff, but how does that fit into that appreciation, that creative side, that artistic side? Yeah. And I'm a big proponent of something Austin Kleon wrote, which is creative as a verb. Yes. I don't see creative as a noun, right?
Yeah.
Do you manifest that? And if you do, how?
I don't, man. Not enough. To be honest with you, it's been a long time since I've put, pencil to paper or brush to canvas. To be frank, I haven't had that time, or haven't created that time. Let me be more specific. But, and even music, I used to do music and DJ. I haven't touched that, either. But what I've tried to really focus on and double down on is supporting a lot of artists. Like, I'm obsessed with watching them create. I'm like, I don't know what I need to do to tap back into that, but I love watching it being created. So there's a lot of Black and South African artists that I support and love, and the house is kind of just like filling up with more and more because I see it and I'm appreciative of it, and I just want to kind of big up, a few different artists that are creating. And I try to do it in my speaking, in a sense, where I'm not just up there lecturing and giving lectures and keynotes. I'm trying to bring creativity into how I bring up new topics and how I teach people. So I'm trying there, but there's still more. I've got a couple books, in outline format that need to come to life as well, and hopefully some more creative and less techie, potentially, topics as well. So I'm trying, but I will. Do
you know what you just did?
Yeah.
You just said, this is how I manifest.
Wow.
It may not be the way you're thinking. Like, that's
sure.
why I said it's not necessarily, okay, you put in kind of brush to canvas.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways. Yeah.
Even the appreciation thereof is a manifestation of it.
Yeah. That makes me feel better. It makes me feel better. Yeah, because it is a bit of a guilty feeling. I read there was a post on Instagram the other day, and they were using AI to create new words and new emotions, and I can't remember for the life of me, but there was a word for a hobby or a talent that you used to excel in that you've let go. And it was a feeling of loss. It was something nostalgia, and I resonated so deeply. I was like, oh, geez, there's so many instruments and painting techniques that were those things that you never. If you told me 15, 20 years ago that I wouldn't be doing that on a daily basis, like, I would have beat you up. Like, what are you talking about? I'm not painting. So there is some guilt that comes with transitioning, but you did make me feel better that manifestation is different, but it's still there.
And hobbies are important.
Yeah.
And I'm a big proponent of hobbies.
Yeah.
Because I remember when, and I think it's come up quite a few times, but like, I remember when in our CVs we had hobbies.
Yes, it's true.
That was it was a line item on a resume or CV.
That's true.
And so I'm a big proponent of people finding hobbies, not to be perfect at it,
right?
But literally just to do something that's not, especially in this world, that's not monetized, that's not. It's not tied to anything.
Yes.
Other than you feel like doing it.
Yeah, and that you get the sense of enjoyment out of it as well.
On that note, thank you very much, bro.
Thank you, man. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast. I'd appreciate it if you could subscribe and or leave a comment wherever it is you're listening. To access the book, there are links on the website www.kojobafa.com. If you're interested, there's also a curated email newsletter that I put out fortnightly to monthly. You can subscribe at zebraculture.substack.com. I hope you enjoyed listening and walk away with something that makes your world a little bit easier.